August 30th, 2025, at precisely 7 a.m., Flamingo missiles fired from Ukraine's Odessa shoreline were swiftly moving toward their objectives in Crimea. These heavy projectiles descended toward the core of Russian fortifications. It almost seemed as though they were expecting to be intercepted by S-400s. 3 Flamingo missiles became simple prey, yet they had been launched openly in broad daylight. At that time, Russian commanders were preparing a fresh offensive through Crimea and believed Ukraine's actions were purely defensive. In reality, Ukraine was relying on this miscalculation. The instant of launching an assault is often the most fragile point and exposes cracks in protection. 3 Flamingo missiles, each weighing 7 tons, with a reach of 3,000 kilometers and able to carry a 1,150-kilogram warhead, were moved to the firing position. Flamingo weapons appeared in full view for the first time during an organized strike. While these rockets were being placed on the launcher, the S-400 systems defending Crimea's skies were fully alert. As a result, striking the intended objective, preparing these missiles for firing, was a prolonged procedure. During that interval, other military units designated for the mission had already been activated. Alongside the missiles, the UJ-26 long-range kamikaze drones formed another crucial element of the strike. At approximately 7 a.m., a surge of activity erupted at the Russian Secret Service headquarters in Army. Senior commanders and intelligence officials were coordinating drone operations against southern Ukrainian cities. At the same time, helicopter pad movements were set to begin along the Sevastopol axis. The Russian patrol schedule covering the Sevastopol coastal defense zone was fixed for the morning watch. It appeared that the Russian forces were preparing for a broad, coordinated assault through Crimea. Yet, only a few minutes later, an irregularity appeared in the aerial picture over the Crimean Peninsula. At first minor, then swiftly expanding. UJ-26 drones, together with 3 Flamingo missiles. This strike combination would astonish Russian intelligence personnel and units of the Black Sea Fleet. In the opening phase, the drones were directed toward Crimean skies. The UJ-26 aircraft were estimated to arrive in Crimea after roughly 45 to 50 minutes of flight. Around 30 minutes after the drones were launched, 3 Flamingo missiles were unleashed. The travel time for these rockets to hit their objectives was calculated at nearly 15 minutes. Put differently, both the drones and the missiles would cause pressure over Crimean airspace simultaneously, and the selected targets would be struck at the same moment. As the drones moved closer to Crimea, 3 Flamingo missiles were launched at 5-second intervals. Each projectile adopted a terrain-hugging trajectory parallel to the shoreline at very low height. The flight altimeter, inertial guidance, and GNSS were all tripled to ensure backup. If GNSS was disrupted, the radar altimeter and digital terrain mapping were set as the primary references. The missile velocities stayed modest. The objective was to advance at a subsonic pace of 950 kilometers per hour beneath the radar horizon, avoiding detection for an extended duration. The payload capacity and operational range of the Flamingo missiles enabled flexible tactical planning. The 1,150-kilogram warhead surpasses the threshold for causing structural collapse or operational paralysis in a single impact, generating both pressure and devastation in subterranean facilities through a bunker-penetrating delayed fuse. This magnitude equals more than double the explosive payload of a Tomahawk. Consequently, once these missiles struck Russian military installations, the outcome would be nothing short of blasts and ruin. The 3,000-kilometer range allowed significant freedom in plotting flight routes. In addition, the Flamingo, built with a fiberglass composite frame, was engineered to resist Russian electronic warfare measures. For this mission, the designated objectives were at short distance, yet the multiple approach options provided by the extended range and the ambiguity of the launch point would have complicated Russian defensive preparations. The first strike in the assault sequence was delivered by drones. Low-visibility kamikaze UAVs penetrated at very low altitude from both the northwest and northeast of Crimea. Each UJ-26 platform carried a high explosive charge in the 25 to 30 kilogram category. Thanks to their composite structure and minimal radar cross-section, they produced only 1 or 2 returns per sweep on fixed radar arrays, enabling precise impact geometry against power distribution cabinets, waveguides, and field fiber nodes through optical infrared sensor coordination. The drones traveled at speeds ranging from 150 to 180 kilometers per pass, guided by GNSS combined with INS and supported by an optical fallback system. Their operational range was kept between 200 and 400 kilometers, depending on the objective, which allowed them to reach the end phase using inertial navigation, even under electronic interference. Blinding attacks introduced delays into the signal processing chain, shrinking the reaction window to just seconds. This left Russian air defenses with almost no margin for interception without mistakes. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drones advanced swiftly toward their objectives to fully close off any chance of interception. The initial blinding strike struck the power distribution unit of the 96 L6AP detection radar. The blast did not disable the antenna itself, but it raised the delay margin within the power network and signal chain. This resulted in a line-present, no-identity effect on the display and prolonged the operator's recognition and classification cycle. Minutes later, the waveguide of the MR10M1 coastal monitoring system was damaged. The antenna kept rotating, yet the signal transmission channel had been cut. In a heavily layered system like Crimea, achieving a 100% blackout is unrealistic. The true advantage lies in forcing several minutes of delay within the response cycle. The Panzer Hour batteries in the lower tier responded automatically. 2 kamikaze UAVs were destroyed, yet the remaining 4 struck their designated cabins, and this dispersed assault produced an in-between condition where the radar communication grid seemed active but left no reliable traces. The 25 to 30 kilogram H warheads focused on disabling the primary power components rather than destroying the antenna itself. This tactic delayed the defense's missile lock-on by a few seconds, and that short pause created an opening for a missile flying at very low altitude. It was exactly at this stage that the strike wave was scheduled to begin, because even if defensive fire was initiated, the tracking delay together with radar horizon constraints could not stop a missile using a low-altitude flight path from slipping through. At this moment, 2 Flamingo missiles were assigned to strike the Russian FSB headquarters in Armyansk, while another Flamingo was directed to devastate Sevastopol. One additional challenge for Ukraine was the threat of GNSS interference. For this reason, the Flamingo's course was secured with GNSS, INS, altimeter, and digital terrain reference backups. Flamingo 1's designated target was the command and communications chamber within the border security and intelligence complex. The warhead employed a delayed fuse penetrator with HE composition. This configuration triggers the blast inside the structure after piercing the outer shell. The bunker-busting variant maintains the delay at the millisecond scale in dense materials, magnifying the shock wave within the chamber. The objective is not to demolish the exterior of the building, but to disable its core functions: power distribution, network backbone, server racks, cable trays, and infrastructure nodes. Flamingo 1 locked on to the target coordinates. Its altitude was kept steady between 20 and 25 meters. The strike was finally executed. The exterior concrete shell of the FSB facility remained intact. After a half-second delay, the internal detonation cut through the energy backbone. Screens in the command center lit up, yet the network stayed mute. Field radio links collapsed. The operational message was obvious: there is light, but no flow of data. For the defenders, this was even more dangerous than a complete blackout, as decision-makers lost precious time relying on a misleading display. As the crisis unfolded inside the FSB facility, Flamingo 2 locked onto the junction between the power distribution control point and the field communications cabin within the same compound. The fuse delay was once again applied. The intention was to induce a functional failure that would stretch the repair timeline from several days to multiple weeks. A short GNSS disruption was detected 15 kilometers from the terminal. The missile continued operating autonomously using altimeter INS and digital terrain mapping. Once the signal was restored, the error log was cleared. In the meantime, the defense attempted another interception using a Pantsir system. Because of the low altitude and urban signal reflections, no effective solution could be achieved for a direct intercept. Although the base seemed structurally intact after the series of Flamingo missile strikes, its command and control capability was entirely disabled. The Ukrainian side then advanced to the following stage of the mission. Flamingo 3 entered its final approach towards Sevastopol. The designated objective was a small pier where patrol boats were docked. The two chosen strike locations were the fuel distribution manifold and the modest command cabin situated on the pier. Why were these two spots selected as targets? Because once those lines are cut, even a reinforced pier block becomes unusable. Vessels cannot dock, the fueling process is disrupted, and diver or barrier operations are delayed. This effectively renders the harbor entrance unsafe. Flamingo 3 maintained an altitude of 15 to 20 meters during the terminal phase. The warhead was configured for an internal detonation. Upon impact, the fuel pipeline burst and the command cabin collapsed. The mooring posts were torn from their base. At least one hovercraft-class patrol vessel sustained severe damage after its mooring link was lost. The stricken craft was identified as an A-8 or A-25 PS hovercraft, built to transport either 8 or 25 armed troops or Marines. For the remaining boats, both the docking connection and fuel cycle were disrupted. On the port side, the quay surface had collapsed and the fueling pipeline was cut. Defensive fire persisted, yet no missiles were available for launch. The brief attack window had closed. Because the response was delayed, none of the countermeasures resulted in any meaningful reduction of damage. At least one hovercraft-class patrol vessel sustained severe damage after its mooring link was lost. The stricken craft was identified as an A-8 or A-25 PS hovercraft, built to transport either 8 or 25 armed troops or Marines. For the remaining boats, both the docking connection and fuel cycle were disrupted. On the port side, the quay surface had collapsed and the fueling pipeline was cut. Defensive fire persisted, yet no missiles were available for launch. The brief attack window had closed. Because the response was delayed, none of the countermeasures resulted in any meaningful reduction of damage. In short, Russia faced the combined impact of Flamingo missiles and kamikaze drones in Crimea. But why was Moscow unable to stop this strike aimed at the FSB facility in Crimea and the hovercraft in Sevastopol? The S-400 systems were not inadequate. In fact, they possessed the capability to intercept all cruise missiles at once. Yet, according to Ukrainian reports, none of the missiles were intercepted. What made the operation possible was the low flight altitude. Specifically, we are referring to a height of just 20 to 30 meters. The radar horizon is a constant limitation. A target flying at low altitude can only be detected by a stationary antenna once the radar line of sight shifts due to the curvature of the Earth. At an altitude of 30 meters, this detection range is roughly 20 to 25 kilometers. By the time the radar identifies it, the target is nearly overhead. If a frontal intercept cannot be calculated within this short window, the fallback method is a rear pursuit scenario. The particle-based interception cloud then disperses behind the target. Flamingo's low altitude, combined with its steady speed pattern, creates a weak and small RCS-like signal in the radar's Doppler filter. Coastal reflections further contribute to generating false tracks. The outcome is that the lock is disrupted and the interception attempt fails. This does not imply that the S-400 system is weak. Instead, the mix of geometry and timing makes this Russian air defense network ineffective for a brief period. Still, the mission represented a challenging threshold. As highlighted, underestimating the S-400 would be a serious error. Achieving success required generating a delay of several tens of seconds while exploiting the low-altitude geometry to the attacker's benefit. Flamingos pressed hardened bunker targets to the single-shot threshold with their heavy warheads. UJ-26 crews did not lose the millisecond opportunity. Kamikaze UAVs created interference rather than a complete shutdown in this case. The blinding effect stayed near the limit, and the missiles struck 3 objectives within the same minute through strict time-on-target coordination. This generated a workload spread that stopped the defense from concentrating on only one threat. The challenges on the ground and the narrow tolerance for mistakes must not be ignored. The likelihood of the strike succeeding was in fact far greater than the chance of failure. 2 kamikaze UAVs were destroyed. 1 wave was held back, and the 96 L6AP demonstrated rapid recovery. The Tour battery launched 2 interceptors against Flamingo 1. If the lock-on sweep had maintained continuity, a genuine threat could have emerged in the forward interception zone. GNSS interference might have pushed the strike off course by several tens of meters without an altimeter digital terrain reference in the terminal phase. This would have resulted in a blast outside the target. None of these factors were left as possibilities. The flight path and terminal were reinforced. The target package was arranged following the 2 critical points principle, rather than concentrating on a single large objective. In the end, no sequence of mistakes unfolded, and all 3 Flamingo missiles reached their marks. The final battle damage assessment after the strike was highly significant. The FSB border installation has lost its command and control capacity. The main power distribution line is cut, and the field communications module is destroyed. This implies that even though the administrative headquarters remains intact, it cannot provide command or logistical coordination to the units deployed in the field. The Sevastopol pier head has given way. The fuel conduit has been cut. At least 1 patrol craft has been rendered inoperative, and the refueling sequence for the remaining vessels has been disrupted. The fact that 3 Flamingos achieved an outcome of this magnitude for the first time demonstrated that even a layered defense, when confronted with heavy warhead payloads and a low-altitude trajectory, can be forced to leave openings measured in minutes. What comes next relies on restructuring the sensor grid with redundant power signal fiber schemes and positioning mobile tracking antennas for low-altitude intercept geometry. But until such a system is established, the voids created by this morning's 3 attacks will keep resonating across the schedule. Thank you for watching.